It's time for
DodgerHeads. What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Medium Large Sports Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined tonight by Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic, here to celebrate probably the only Sunday off day the Dodgers will ever have in our lifetimes, Fabian.
I think there's actually one a couple of years ago. It was weird. Like, it's one of those really random, rare things. I think a couple of years ago, I think it was against the Angels, like 2-game series against the Angels leading into the All-Star break, something weird. But yeah, it's a rarity. I will gladly enjoy it. I went to the beach today. I can't remember the last time I did that on a non-winter Sunday. So yeah, making the most of it.
I love it. And I also saw you tweeting about some college basketball. I imagine you are rooting for, is it anybody other than Arizona that we're currently rooting for in the Ardaya household?
I would say so, yeah. We got two Arizona State graduates in this household, so yeah, I think it's their first Final Four. Since they won the national championship. So it's been a while for them. It's a good team, but yeah, I'm hoping any other team wins.
Crazy game today. Crazy game. The Duke UConn game. I've got a cousin who's a UConn fan who was just losing it in my texts. Poor Caden Boozer, just hold the ball. Just hold the ball and all this goes away.
Yeah.
But nobody's here to talk college basketball with us, although I would love to for all of this because I love March Madness. We are going to talk Dodgers. We're going to talk about the hot start. We're going to talk Andy Pages, Tanner Scott, Roki Sasaki, River Ryan, some injury updates, all sorts of stuff. So shout out to everybody joining us live on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. We appreciate you. Those watching and listening after the fact, thank you as well. We do have a super chat right from the get-go. Aaron wants to know, Fabian, are the trumpets as electric in person as they seem on Sportsnet LA?
Yeah, I'd say so. It was definitely a surprise, especially the first night where there obviously was no heads up. Even Edwin Diaz didn't really have a heads up that the trumpets were coming. He actually heard Tatiana Tate rehearsing a little bit briefly right before he was about to start warming up, and he thought it was just a fan that just had smuggled a trumpet into the ballpark. It turns out it was a local musician, Tatiana Tate, who performed yesterday as well. And yeah, it's one of those things that they really brought it. I'd expect it to be part of something that the Dodgers really lean into over the course of the 3 years that Edwin Diaz is under contract.
I have a thought. Maybe don't surprise the closer right before he goes in to the biggest game. Like maybe just give him a heads up. Hey, live trumpets. Like that doesn't seem too hard to me, you know?
Hey, it's a first test though. He's battle tested now. He knows that whether there's live trumpets or not, he's ready to go.
I also loved, you would have missed this, but on the broadcast, I believe it was Joe and Oral, and one of them made a comment of I don't know if they can afford to have a live trumpet player here every single time. I'm thinking to myself, Joe, Uniqlo just paid him $120 million. I think we can afford a trumpet player 81 times a year just in case he gets used. So it sounds like we don't have any word if a live trumpet player will be there every game. Is that fair?
Yeah, nothing official, but I mean, it does seem like it's not something that's gonna be a one-off. But I don't know how regularly it'll be. But it's definitely something that the Dodgers are exploring different ways to really make this an event, and it's something that they've done a lot of different elements around the ballpark, trying to make it a huge event. And I think with Diaz in particular, they've started to really lean into it ever since from the moment they signed him.
I love it. I love it. All right. So let's talk big picture with the Dodgers. Everybody watching this show knows they are undefeated. They have trailed 2-0 in all 3 games. They have won all 3 of those. Some of my favorite stats. They've scored 12 runs in the 5th inning or later in these 3 games. They have 3 separate innings in which they scored 4 runs. They have not allowed a run to the opponent after the 4th inning. The bullpen, which we'll get into later, 11 2/3, scoreless, only 7 base runners. And all of this, by the way, with Shohei Ohtani being 1 for 8, Kyle Tucker 2 for 11, and Teoscar Hernandez 1 for 10. So when we look big picture at the 3 games we just saw, it is the smallest of small sample sizes in a 162 game season. And yet it's all we have so far. So what has jumped out to you big picture from the 3 games we've seen so far?
Yeah, I think first off the lineup, like you mentioned, they've been able to generate this kind of offense, even with Shohei Ohtani not really fully going. He's drawing some walks, he's getting on base. Kyle Tucker's not fully getting going, although those 2 hits he has are both big hits that drove in runs late in games. And yeah, Teoscar Hernandez hasn't gotten going, but still, the ethos of this offense, sort of being relentless, as Dave Roberts kind of put it, where it just gets so difficult when they're going. where all of a sudden you have a 5-6 hitter sequence, and you can sort of see the stress that puts on opposing pitching staff. And I think that's the big thing. And I think that's one of those things where it was a bit of a return to the offense that you've come to expect from the Dodgers, where second half of last year and then into the postseason, that wasn't there quite as consistently. And I think having an extra presence there and a Kyle Tucker helps, because at the very least, it just gives you another guy capable of having that 6, 7, 8 pitch at bat that really can drain an opposing pitcher. And even if you get that guy out, it's going to have an effect later on in the inning. So having that, you can sort of see it's more of like the offense that you're used to seeing from the Dodgers, as opposed to the second half version that was a little bit concerning, where it started to raise some questions. Okay, is their approach something that they're sticking to consistently enough? Is it a byproduct of some of these hitters having to be performing differently than they usually do just because of some age and stuff like that? I think right now they're looking more cohesive.
Yeah, I've used the analogy of it feels like an avalanche or a tidal wave. And I think that like when a wave runs into a wall, you're not asking the question of like big picture, how strong is the wall? The problem is like, where is the weakest point in the wall and how strong is that? Because if you're the Diamondbacks, you're going to have to throw 4 or 5 pitchers at the Dodgers. And if one of those guys is a weak link, if 2 of those guys is a weak link, it doesn't matter. Eduardo Rodriguez could be awesome, which he has been the last 2 times we've seen him pitch. But it's like eventually the bullpen is going to come in. And unless all of those guys are dialed, Will Smith, or the night before, the night before was Alex Freeland with a double and a home run off of the pitcher. So it just feels like relentless. We've used the word inevitable on this show. It's like, cool, you can hold them down for 4 innings, 5 innings, 6 innings, 7 innings. The one crack in the door that pops up at some point, someone's going to bash it down. And that's what I feel like opposing teams are going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and even last night, like Juan Murillo was close to out of that inning. And then sort of a couple of 2-strike pitches that Will Smith doesn't chase. Once you sort of foul those pitches back, you realize, okay, if he's not going to bite on the slider, if he's able to get to that fastball up in the zone, there's not really much else that he can throw him. So he tried another fastball up in the zone, and Will Smith was ready for it. But like even in that situation, he was 1 strike really away from getting out of that spot. So yeah, it's with this Dodgers team. I think you saw it last year, obviously in Game 7 too. Like they have a way of finding a way to chip away. They're being able to put up good at bats even when guys aren't feeling great. I know people keep pointing to a couple nights ago with Shohei Ohtani rolling the ball over to second base to advance the runner, but stuff like that. And even Mookie Betts drawing the walk before Will Smith yesterday. Like these superstars have done a good job of, even when they aren't necessarily swinging the bat the best, they're still putting together solid at bats that at least give a chance to pass the baton to the next guy to really have a chance.
And their number 9 hitter is Alex Freeland or Miguel Rojas, which, whatever you think about those 2 players, they're probably not batting 9th in a ton of lineups around the league, or they're at least like above average number 9 hitters. And so even in this small sample size, in one of those games, their single best player was the guy that most Dodger fans didn't want on the opening day roster, didn't believe could hit. And he hits a home run. He hits a double after like 14 consecutive guys had been retired. And I think that's the nature of it, right? Like it doesn't really matter who comes in, because this team is both top heavy in the fact that like 1 through 8 are basically studs and all-star caliber players, but also 9 through 14 on this roster are all going to be guys that at any given moment could give you something.
Yeah, that's the hope. And I think that's sort of what the Dodgers are hoping for. And even like yesterday, like Miguel Rojas was 2 for 2 before game pinch hit 4. Exactly. So like stuff like that, like where they are making sure that this lineup is constructed that you don't really have any chance to catch your breath. And even the guys you'd expect to, a guy like Miguel Rojas, a guy like an Alex Freeland, or a guy like an Andy Pajes who's hitting 8th, like those are still guys that normally most lineups you'd be able to have sort of catch your breath a little bit. But if you do that against this lineup, there's a chance it winds up in the seats. So I think it's one of those things that the Dodgers are hoping that they can keep this going, and health plays a part in it, and also just sticking to the approach plays a part in it. But on the whole, like, it does seem like they are positioned to do this as long as possible.
And oh, by the way, if you're not paying attention to what's happening in Oklahoma City, which it's AAA and all the caveats, Ha-Seong Kim went 5 for 5 in his first game, reached in his first 2 plate appearances. There's a guy, James Tibbs. Some people I know have maybe heard of this guy. Here's, according to Alex Friedman, here's his first 9 plate appearances, or excuse me, his last first, whatever, 9 plate appearances. Triple, double, single, double, fielder's choice, walk with the bases loaded, homer, homer, double. So in his first taste of AAA, James Tibbs appears to be doing well. And those are pretty much the first 2 guys at the top of the list on if the Dodgers need somebody to dip down. Again, AAA numbers, all the caveats involved. But it's just funny to think the depth that this team has. In light of all this, they're 3-0. Last year, Fabian, this team opened up the season on an 8-0 run. After watching 3 games against Arizona, who, for what it's worth, Anthony and I both picked as the team to finish second in the National League West this year. That's not the popular pick, I would imagine, but we think they're going to be okay at least. So it's not like they swept the Colorado Rockies here. I don't see a reason this team can't entirely go on a run. I mean, honestly, Roki Sasaki pitching tomorrow would be the only caveat, the only sort of pebble in the way of all of this. But do you see this team possibly going on a little bit of a run to start the season?
I think they could start off strong, and I think it's important to remember that they came back from deficits in the first 3 games, and even last year during that 8-0 start, there were a lot of games that were very losable in that stretch. So like, there's a lot of randomness, some luck that goes into starting out 8-0, which was the best start ever for a reigning champion. So I'm not saying the Dodgers are poised to like go 8-0, 9-0, but I do think that obviously with the talent they have, the way they're able to line up their pitching, the way their bullpen has been throwing the ball so far, and the fact that they've been able to, for the most part, outside of obviously the Emmet Sheehan start, really avoid taxing guys. They're gonna be in a position where they're gonna be able to win a lot of series, and that take you 2 out of 3 a lot of times. Like that's how you sort of put up that 670 or something like that winning percentage over the course of the first month. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a strong April for the Dodgers.
For context, if you were to go and if you were interested in trying to wager on the Dodgers tomorrow, with Roki Sasaki on the mound and all of his struggles, they are minus 207 right now to win the game. So that is likely going to be the closest spread that they see, the closest money line that they see in the coming days. And so winning 8 or 9 in a row is difficult, and yet trying to find the one they lose is also going to be difficult as well. We have another super chat from Amanda. Says, Fabian, love the story about Clubhouse culture. Looking forward to more behind the scenes stories. Can you give us a little insight, like what prompted that story and what was it like to try and collect all of the little tidbits that goes into such a big piece?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that like the word like buy-in gets thrown around a lot for the Dodgers, and it has for years. And it's one of those things I've kind of asked about off and on, like how do you get buy-in? Like how easy is or difficult is that to to get? And I think understanding how the last couple of years kind of played out, it just seemed like it was a really tight knit group. And obviously, you're going to say that a lot about teams that win, but it seemed like there's something to their ability to consistently bring in superstars who don't. It doesn't feel like the earth changes because a guy gets brought in. Obviously, when Shohei Ohtani gets brought in, a lot of things change, but it still felt like on a day-to-day basis, like there weren't guys complaining about the roles. There weren't guys as much sort of talking about, oh, I should be using this role, this sort of situation. It's easy for certain guys to mix in, and you hear stories off and on throughout the years just about guys helping each other out. And then also with Clayton Kershaw retiring, that's something that sort of got brought up a lot, especially early on at FanFest. Was like, okay, what's going to be different with Clayton Kershaw gone? And everyone keeps talking about culture. Like culture is honestly one of those things that's like tough to like write about. It can seem like eyewash a lot of times just because like, yeah, like no one's gonna say you have bad culture, and usually teams that win, you don't hear a lot about what's happening behind the scenes. But it's one of those things where like the more and more you talk to guys and have an understanding for like stuff that they've helped each other out on, or stuff that they've leaned each other on for, like you start to compile those stories, and you can sort of see a better picture just through small little vignettes like that, like like Mookie Betts getting helped during the 2024 postseason is something that he talked about was very impactful and powerful for him. Mookie Betts talked about how much it helped having Miguel Rojas around. Max Muncy talked last year about how much it helped when he was having a defensive slump in the middle of the season, having Mookie Betts there go out of his way to help him out. Like you hear stories like last spring, you would hear like security guards kind of joke about like, oh, Andy Paez and Teoscar Hernandez are closing out the hitting lab again. Like they're out after hours kind of swinging and working together. And you can sort of see those and things and piece them together. And I think that's one of those things. And then you hear some more stuff as you report stuff out, like obviously like Kershaw taking in Jack Dreyer and Emmet Sheehan, and just being around those guys. So you collect some of those stories, and so it's like you as you hear more of those stories and hear more people tell it, the more you sort of believe it. And it's one of those things where it's pretty rare to have a situation where you bring in so many superstars in the same room. Like there aren't a lot of teams going out and doing that, but sometimes you definitely hear about the situations where it doesn't go well. So what is it about this group that makes it consistently go well, especially the last couple years as they've kind of really refined this group? And I think that's what's kind of stood out, and it's pretty unique situation the Dodgers have found themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved reading that. By the way, this is reference to an article that Fabian's got up at The Athletic. And the two things that stood out, one is the story you just told where basically Kershaw's family moved back to Texas and he was going to be living in his house by himself. He heard that Emmet Sheehan and Jack Dreyer were going to be just staying in a hotel. And he's like, why don't you guys come live with me? Which, I mean, I can't even imagine if you're a guy like Jack Dreyer, who, again, was basically a nobody, an undrafted player who gets protected in the Rule 5 draft. He wasn't on a ton of those who are the Dodgers going to protect in the Rule 5 draft lists. He gets protected. He's having a great season. And then he gets to live with Clayton Kershaw. And then the second piece, though, was Dave Roberts. I can't remember if Dave Roberts said it or maybe somebody else did. And then Dave you asked him about it. But basically, like, Dave never has to do a lot of the work that a manager would expect to do because guys just understand so much what the expectation is and what the standard is. And so he doesn't have to like tell people to do something twice. He says it once or he doesn't even say it. And it's either, it doesn't even sound like there was like an enforcer in the clubhouse. Like it's like, oh, you better do it. Otherwise Miguel Rojas is going to come yell at you. It's like this unspoken rule, but that is universally followed when it comes to Dave's sort of the values of the Dodgers and the expectations that are placed on everybody in the clubhouse.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things that you kind of hear from guys like, like, a lot of times like stuff gets handled before it even gets to Dave, and you sort of ask Dave about it. It's like, yeah, like I hear about it sometimes after the fact, but it's not a, hey, how to be handled. It's hey, this has been handled. Here's what happened, just so you know that it did happen in case something comes up. So a lot of situations like that. And the way, like when I asked Dave Roberts, like when that sort of changed was, he said that was with Freddie Freeman. And he said that in Freddie Freeman's first season with the Dodgers, mind you, like Freddie Freeman's first season with the Dodgers included like one of the few situations where you hear of maybe some disharmony in the clubhouse where he goes back to Atlanta that maybe ruffles some feathers, just how emotional he was there. Just some guys maybe taken aback by how emotional that was. And Freddie Freeman even apologized for it right afterwards to his teammates. But another story from that first season that Dave Roberts kind of related to me was like, at some point, he got back to Dave Roberts that Freddie Freeman basically said like, hey, Dave's the manager. We trust him. We don't question what he does. Like there's gonna be situations where you get pinch hit for, where you get sat, where you don't get used in a situation where you thought you would. We don't question that. He has his reasons for doing that. We have to trust him, so he has the trust in us. And Dave Roberts said like that. The clubhouse has been like that basically from that moment on, where guys, there isn't a questioning of what Dave Roberts is doing. If anything, one of the things that Dave Roberts said was that this spring he would like walk around the clubhouse and he would just overhear guys sort of talking and having conversations about the game, and the talking points would be things that he has harped on in the past. Crazy. So like they're like repeating his message without him having to do it. So that's one of those things that Dave said that he was proudest of just sort of what he's been able to build there.
Well, and just not to linger on this too long, but I'm curious when you personally hear those types of stories, like in the nature of work that we're interacting with people in the chat, in the comments on social media. Dave Roberts, as you know, up until the last maybe 6 to 12 months, hasn't exactly been the most popular guy in the room. But when I hear a story like that, I'm like, that's the value you can't replace, because when the next guy comes in, he's not immediately going to have the buy-in of everybody in the clubhouse to say whatever Dave says goes, and if he does it, you don't question it. Like Dave has earned that right. And I feel like that's on top of all of the culture stuff and whatever, but it feels like maybe that's a superpower that until your story, I didn't really recognize that he had.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things like where throughout the years, one of those things I would sort of say with Dave Roberts, like, oh, obviously there's going to be criticism at times about some moves he makes, about some strategy decisions, especially during the postseason. Like there's been rightful questions about some of the things he's done over the years and stuff that he's had open conversations about afterwards about like what he like his thought process and stuff like that. But most of his job, especially with how things are situated in LA, is basically being a sounding board for guys, basically being a guy who is managing 26 different personalities, really 40 different personalities at once, because like there's so many guys coming in and out. There's so many new and big names coming in and out. That plus like the Dodgers, there's so much more that comes with his duties than maybe most managers with when it comes to uh, handshaking sponsors and
Yeah.
dealing with all the off the field stuff and speaking to the media. Like there's so much more to the job than just what happens in those 9 innings. But it's one of those things where the stuff he does behind the scenes certainly helps him during games. And yeah, there's been issues sometimes with trusting guys too much, but like, he's been loyal to a fault at times.
Yeah.
But that's also some his greatest strength, and that's why he is willing to go to a Miguel Rojas for the last 2 games of the World Series. Like I know and I trust that this guy, like this might be the end of his career. Like he's going to give it everything. He's going to have the at bats that I want in this situation. But he also was the same guy who had the trust in Andy Pages to keep starting him up to that point. And even when he didn't start him in games 6 and 7, that relationship was strong enough that he didn't lose Pages entirely. So Pages was ready to go coming off the bench for game 7.
Well, and this is why you're a professional, first of all, Fabian, because we're going to transition immediately into a conversation about Andy Pages. So right from the get-go, already understanding the way that these transitions work on the show. I love it. But I'm with you on that. Like, I do think Dave gets crushed when the loyalty is to a fault, but we probably don't talk enough about the moments when it's like, well, the loyalty is what got Miguel Rojas into the game to hit the home run. It's what kept Andy Pages engaged enough to make the catch that saves the game and all those types of things. Like we think about the reliever, him going back to Blake Trinan for the 18th time when everybody else stopped trusting him 4 outings ago. But it's also the flip side that probably doesn't get talked about enough. So let's flip gears, though. I do want to talk about Andy Pages, who you mentioned, because I think he's in an interesting spot. And I try my hardest not to overreact to small samples. But I think what you wrote in your Dodgers notes that came out this morning on The Athletic lines up with a lot of the stuff that I've seen on Andy Pages. So we play a game on this show called Buying or Selling. And I want to start with Andy Pages, and I'll ask you, are you buying or selling that Andy Pages is on the trajectory to being a star? Now, I'll define star because I was like, what's the difference between a superstar? I don't think Andy Pages is necessarily on track to be a superstar, but calling him like an all-star, like Santiago Espinal's an all-star. So what's in between? So a star is kind of this in between. He's not quite a superstar, but he's a guy who could easily go and make 3 or 4 all-star games over the next 10 years. When I look at Andy Pages last year, obviously you have to set aside what we saw in the postseason because that wasn't great. But even just in the first 3 games offensively, and maybe more importantly, defensively, I see a guy who seems to be on track to reaching the level of being a star. Are you buying or selling that?
I mean, this is a guy who was basically a 4-win player last year. So like you could argue that last year he had stretches where he looked like a star. He had stretches first half, especially of last year, where he looked like he could have been an all-star.
Should have been,
So yeah, like there definitely is something to buy there with the confidence there. The defense is so much better than it was this time last year. I remember last year being on the road, that first road trip in DC when he was really scuffling with the bat, but also just some mental lapses defensively. Like he was only half the time in center, half the time in right, and even then, like right field, he was not taking the right angles to catch a ball so he could line up to throw to third base and use his arm, or he was misreading balls over his head. He deserves a ton of credit for behind the scenes work to become not just good out in center, but like legitimately really good. Like he had a couple of plays, like obviously the play where he's coming in right field to, I think it was Gabriel Moreno's ball to make a sliding catch. That's the ball that he doesn't go grab last year. There's another ball that he tracked all the way towards basically behind where Teoscar Hernandez was standing in left field to go track down a ball at the warning track. His range and reads have gotten so much better. We know the arm is good. So having that plus center field defense already sets you up possibly to be a star. And I know that's something that Andy McCullough, I think, wrote years ago was how difficult it was to get consistent offensive production at center field these days, where it's turned into a position where the defensive demands are so strong that the offensive production, it's hard to find anything close to maybe what you'd find in a corner offensively. Pages provides that, at least on the power front, second most home runs on the team last year, and the strides that the work he's done behind the scenes to try to at least improve his play discipline, are at least things that can trend him upwards. He's still not going to draw a ton of walks. He's still going to be a flawed player, but I do trust that this is a guy who can continue to evolve, because if you would have told me when Andy Pages was in big league camp a couple years ago that he'd be an athletic, spindly center fielder with some bat to ball skills, I would have been super surprised, because like this was a guy who was a big, stocky corner outfielder, slugger, with like some of the most extreme launch angles and like extreme steep bat paths in the entire system. Like that was his calling card. Like he was going to strike out a bunch, hit a bunch of home runs, have a strong arm and right, but maybe not be the best defender. To turning that into a guy who can have an adjustable swing, who can play a plus center field, like that is a huge surprise. So I think being able to make that adjustment is one of those things that I can't really doubt Pages doing much.
Yeah, I think you make the great point, which is if the defense is real, the offense could backslide a little bit and he would still potentially be on track for the type of progression that we're talking about. And I joked the other night on this show, like, I feel like I was being gaslit by somebody who was like, his defense wasn't that bad. I was like, I remember watching him play center field a year ago. It was like watching O'Neal Cruz play center field at times, where it was like he's running in on a ball that's over his head. And look, the ball comes off the bat very differently in center field. A lot of people were saying that. And so it wasn't like this guy's never going to figure it out. But I think if you would have told any Dodger fan 12 months ago that not only is he going to play we would have settled for competent center field. You know, nobody was asking him to go be a Gold Glove caliber center fielder. But you mentioned the sliding catch he makes in game 1 of the season, I believe. And one of the accounts had it as like a 5% catch probability based on the amount of ground he had to cover, the speed, all of that. And then he makes the sliding catch. He has not become a competent center fielder. He has become one of the best center fielders. And we've said on this show, defensive metrics are terrible. Of all the metrics, defensive ones are the worst. And yet, I'll just share this. Baseball Savant had him as like the 5th best outfielder last season in fielding run value. And then that's amped up because he's in center field. But I thought you made the great comparison in your article. You talked about looking at Pete Crow Armstrong, who just signed a 6-year, $115 million extension, 4 years away from free agency with the Cubs. And I think when people hear PCA, they know he's arguably the best center fielder defensively in all of Major League Baseball. But I think I was surprised to realize that Andy Pages offensively was better than him last year. And so when you're comparing these two players, Pages was a 113 weighted runs created plus. PCA was a 109 weighted runs created plus. Pages had a higher OPS. PCA had some more home runs. One guy's 23. The other guy's Pages is 24. So like, I just look at these two guys and where I see PCA, how I think he's viewed around the league. I guess I just don't necessarily see why Pages can't be in the exact same conversation.
I will say, like, the PCA of the glove, like, it's just, I know, like, Pages has made strides defensively with the glove. PCA's glove is, like, on a whole other level. And I think that's, like, one of those things that it's a little bit more of a difference maker. And I think that's one of those things that is part of why he got the price tag they did. And he means so much to that city. And there's probably some more other motivations involved for the Cubs to extend him. But yeah, it's one of those things where PCA is a flawed hitter at this point, where he obviously has super talent. I wouldn't be surprised if he puts it all together. But like last year, had stretches where he got benched against left-handed pitching. He had the red hot start, but really cooled off in the second half. Pages has turned himself into one of the better center fielders in the sport. I think it's one of those things at the end of the day where, and with PCA getting his contract extension, it was one of those things where I at least asked around just because it was worth looking at. Like, all right, like there's another data point, at least for a guy signing that far out from free agency. There's other things that the Dodgers, like, that probably means the Dodgers would want to wait in terms of how much club control he has left. The fact that he's a Super 2 guy, which means that they would have him under 4 years of arbitration instead of 3, which is part of why he's a little bit further out from free agency than PCA was, even though they have basically the same amount of service time. So there's a lot of things that maybe encourage the Dodgers maybe to kick the can down the road, but it was worth at least asking around after seeing PCA's deal.
Well, and a side note on that, like I would say 3 or 4 years ago, anytime I heard of a player signing one of these pre-arbitration extensions, it often felt like the player was being taken advantage of. Now, that might be in part because a lot of those deals were being done by guys who had signed in international free agency, but it does feel like these deals have changed a little bit over the last couple of years. But reading your article, I was like laughing when I read that the Dodgers tried to sign these contracts, and I knew this, but I guess I had forgotten. They tried to sign a contract with Buehler, Dustin May, and Gavin Lux, and I just read that and I was thinking, like, you want to name 3 other guys who definitely should have signed whatever extension was placed in front of them? Dustin May might have done all right based on the contract he signed this year, but it just goes to show that, like, sometimes it is in the player's best interest if an offer is made, and you're reporting the Dodgers have not even talked about an extension with Pages. But I just thought it was interesting, like, oh, maybe this isn't such a bad deal all of the time for the players.
Yeah, and sometimes also then you get Will Smith on a record extension, and that works out really well. So it's one of those things where sometimes the best deal that you make is the one that you didn't make, but also there's situations where like the Dodgers were trying to be opportunistic. I didn't we knew about Walker Buehler's one. I didn't know about May and Lux until I started asking around a little bit this week. But yeah, like definitely May was a unique situation because he was coming off, like, that was where he was coming off, I think, coming off the first surgery. He was about to come back from his first Tommy John surgery. Dodgers were wanting to take advantage of, like, this is a guy who's super talented coming off injury, maybe wants to preserve his future a little bit more. So they were willing to talk extension. Things never really got close there. But yeah, I think it's one of those things where it makes sense a lot of the time. But I think with a situation like Pages, unless like someone from like Pages' camp is like, hey, we want to stay here for a while, I don't know if it's something that they're going to necessarily be in a rush to talk about.
Yeah, because Pages he has this year and then 4 more full seasons, I believe, after this until he hits free agency. And I imagine if for the Dodgers, part of the equation is the 9 outfield prospects they have coming up. Now, it's worth pointing out, and I've tried to repeat this over and over, like, Pages right now is the best case scenario for most of the guys. Like, don't assume that any of these guys are ever going to be better than the version of Andy Pages that we have right now. And yet I would imagine the Dodgers are trying to figure out, like, okay, we do have literally at every level of the minor leagues this year, probably 4+ guys who are higher level prospects at the level they are at. And so all of these things are the puzzle pieces that Andrew Friedman and company, Brandon Gomes, all of them are trying to piece together, especially when it comes to what do we do with Pages, which is maybe why, to your point, you just kick the can down the road and say, we don't have to make a decision. Let's see how some of these guys develop. Let's see what Pages does over the next couple of years, because if he turns out to be as awesome as everybody thinks he might be, then we'll just pay him what he's worth then, because money's not an issue.
Yeah, I think the other thing is he's the one guy of that group who's guaranteed to stick in center field, at least for right now. Like, Quintero is a guy who's like super talented and is the guy who's playing primarily center field now amongst that group, but like he's still a ways away from the big league. Zach Earhart has played some center field, but he's also like not a guy you view in the Pages kind of mold in terms of pedigree. So the other guys are corner outfield guys at this point for the most part. So that's another wrinkle in there. It's just finding a guy who's capable of playing center field. The fact that Pages has been able to do it and get as good at it as he has, like, it's a huge thing for him in the future, for not just his production for the Dodgers, but also like for him to sort of market himself in the future.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Okay, let's shift gears to our next buy or sell. And this is something that I've been paying attention to end of spring training through the regular season. I know you have as well, because you and Katie both asked Dave Roberts about it after the game. But Emmet Sheehan, some of the velocity concerns with him. In his first start this season, he threw 8 fastballs below 93 miles an hour, including one that was at 91.2. He threw 10 more that were below 94 miles an hour. So 18 total below 94 miles an hour. You had the number. He threw 44 pitches all of last season below 94 miles an hour. Again, 18 in one start tonight. Dave Roberts was asked about this after by you, and then followed up by Katie, which I very much appreciated. I was like, please, somebody ask about it. So, quote, we're still digging into it. We don't have an answer, was kind of where he started. So are you buying or selling that this is a big deal and something that Dodger fans should be concerned about?
In terms of big deal for the short term, I would say yeah. Long term, as long as there isn't a health concern, I would say no. I think the big thing is ruling out the health concern, which to be clear, like Emmet Sheehan has not voiced that it's a health thing either publicly or to the Dodgers. Like
Yeah.
they have, and I think one thing that was kind of raised to me was if it was a health concern, then he wouldn't have the velocity in the first inning before it tails down the second and third, which leads them to believe more that it's maybe more mechanical. He's falling out of his mechanics in the middle of an outing.
Okay.
That's still one of those things that they have to sort of parse through and try to figure out, because obviously it's an issue that if his velocity is tailing off like this in the middle of an outing, like he still found ways to be effective. Like he still got a lot of swing and miss that outing. Obviously the actual stat line was not very good. And I think it impacted his ability to maybe go through the lineup multiple times, especially when everyone knew that he was really leaning as heavily on the changeup as he was. Like they were able to sort of wait on it and also not have to fear or respect the fastball as much if the velocity was ticking down. But like, yeah, it's one of those things that the Dodgers definitely have to figure out, whether it is trying to find a way, like figure out what is off in the delivery in the first inning that maybe is a lot like causing fatigue earlier and loses velocity, or if there's something that he is doing right at the start of outings but not able to keep doing as outings go along.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great point that and the insight into, hey, if this was an injury, he wouldn't be touching 95.8 in the first inning. Everything would be coming out at 93.5. And that brings me back to, like, the Dodgers are not stupid, which is always a good place to start in these conversations. If the Dodgers were worried about Emmet Sheehan's arm, they wouldn't just continue to send him out there inning after inning after inning, because they're seeing not only the velocity, they're seeing way more data than we are on all of this. And yet, like the Dave Roberts stuff of like, I don't know. I mean, he tells us he's fine and we don't have an answer, and maybe it's mechanical. I guess I just have PTSD as a fan when you see velocity dip in a starting pitcher to the degree of like 91.2 mile an hour fastball. There's real concern. Now, the flip side that I have to acknowledge as well is, to your point, he was pretty effective. Like in that first inning where the velocity was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. He struck out the side. And part of me, optimistic me, is like, maybe this is going to make him a way better pitcher in the long run, because a guy that's probably been able to lean on his fastball endlessly for his entire career is now being forced to go get guys out with the changeup that he threw a lot more in that outing, with the breaking ball. And so maybe once the fastball does come back, there's some silver lining in the midst of this entire process for Sheehan.
Yeah, I think actually Dave Roberts kind of noticed, like, hey, like, yeah, he went to the changeup probably because the fastball wasn't very good. And I'm glad that he did that, because he sort of read the situation. It's like, hey, you still have to get outs. You don't have to worry about like why your velocity is not where you want it to be in the middle of an outing, because you still have your job to do. So that's one of those things that Dave Roberts kind of pointed out. I'm sure that he and Emmet Sheehan and everyone involved with the Dodgers would rather not have to figure that problem out in the middle of an outing. But yeah, like to your point earlier, yes, like when you see a velocity drop, especially mid outing, your first thought is injury. But the fact that this keeps happening, it means that it's something that they still have to sort out behind the scenes. But they're also not in a position where they necessarily have to. As long as as long as they don't believe there's an injury, I don't think that they need to like necessarily pull him from the rotation to figure out what's going on. I think they can afford to let him work through this while continuing to try to diagnose what exactly is going on.
And as far as you know, they haven't, and there are no plans to go and do scans or any of that type of thing until he tells them, hey, my elbow hurts or something like that.
Yeah. Like, it's one of those things where like they have not voiced anything to him. Like they're gonna keep obviously going through like the delivery stuff just to see if there's anything they can notice, stuff that's a little bit different. And also, I'm sure there's something to his body's a little bit different than it was last year. He went out of his way to try to bulk up, to try to physically withstand a full season. Maybe there is an adjustment period to your body is just different, so you're gonna be moving a little bit different, and even the smallest details that you can't fully notice are maybe there that maybe you can diagnose with more and more pitches, more and more of a sample size, and can compare, like have a more direct comparison to maybe what you were doing at the end of last year when he was more 96, 97 pretty regularly, even in starts.
Yeah, absolutely. So something to monitor there for Dodger fans. Last one on the buy or sell note. And this one, admittedly, we're probably the cart like 25 yards ahead of the horse on this one. But Tanner Scott, are we buying or selling that Tanner Scott is not just back, Fabian, but he is back?
I'm holding for now. Like I'm probably selling for now, just because it is super small sample.
Yeah.
Even like when I wrote a basically a preface like, hey, this is not anything to really read into. But it was interesting, at least, to see how he went about one at bat. And this is even more further dissecting into small sample, where it's not just like a couple outings. It is one batter that sort of stood out to me a little bit, was coming into that spot against Alek Thomas, where like he did so often last year, he got ahead 0-2, or he would get ahead 1-2, 0-2. So 2 strikes for guys. And that's honestly was the time where it was more dangerous for Tanner Scott. He was one of the worst guys in terms of being unpredictable in those 2-strike counts last year, where he was in the zone too much in those spots. And rather than just trying to blow guys away, even in the strike zone with a high 90s fastball or a slider that he thought was nasty, but still in the zone and in the hitting zone where guys can make damage. And he got hurt for it last year. And I think since you noticed that Thomas at bat is once he got ahead 0-2 quickly, not a single pitch he threw the rest of that at bat was in the zone. And he got Thomas to chase twice, once on a fastball off the plate that he fouled off, and then went back up and in with another fastball that he swung right through and chased. I think that's the big thing. Like, the stuff is good, and it's not just good, but it's good enough to get chase, especially in chase counts. And if he's doing that, that's more of what he was doing in Miami. That's more of what he was doing in San Diego. And that the Dodgers are hoping can sort of get him back in the right direction. So it's one outing, and I'm sure he had spots, especially second half last year when they were really extra vocal with him about being unpredictable. He had spots where maybe he looked to be able to do similar stuff, and you pull individual at bats, maybe where he did execute that a little bit better. But like, at least that stood out a little bit to me in the middle of that outing, just the fact that he went back into the same sort of spot and did something different, did something that the Dodgers have wanted him to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. Side note, not on the list. Are we buying Will Klein as a guy? I mean, he's pitched like 50% more batters than Tanner Scott. So surely we're a big sample size there, right?
I think stuff wise, you can be in on Will Klein for sure. Like, and I think that's always been the thing. And the big thing with him, like even second half of last year, like you saw the flashes, is if he can get that stuff in the zone, then you're looking at a guy who's completely different. And I think you're definitely seeing a more confident guy than you saw last year. Like last year, he was a guy who clearly had good stuff, didn't have a great feel for where it was going. He had bounced around a lot, and he all of a sudden found himself in the middle of a playoff race and was not expecting to be part of the World Series roster. And then all of a sudden here he is and comes out there and pitches well and is a hero. And there's absolutely a confidence that comes with that. And with that confidence, it also comes the confidence that the organization gave in him. When I was talking with him about the spring, it's like, hey, your stuff is so good, you don't have to worry about nibbling. Just get it in the zone, and it's going to be effective enough to get outs. And he's clearly doing that. And some of that is mechanical and being able to consistently repeat his delivery, but some of that's also just confidence and approach. Like, hey, here's my stuff, go hit it.
Yeah.
And it's working so far this spring. It's working so far early on this season. I asked Dave Roberts the other day, like, could you see Will Klein moving into a leverage role? He's like, yeah, like it's small sample, but yeah, like he's trending in that direction because the stuff, and he has arguably the best pure stuff of anyone in that bullpen right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. And again, it's just the epitome of the Dodgers to go and find these people. I know they acquired him in a trade, but it's like they're finding these guys off the scrap heap. The Mariners, like, were who they got them from. The Mariners, who were very nearly in the World Series, not a team that is getting rid of guys that they believe in their bullpen.
And a good pitching development team, too. Like a really good pitching development team.
Totally. So crazy stuff there. All right, enough with buy or sell. Let's get to a couple news items here. The first one I want to talk about is River Ryan, and you are the perfect person to ask this question because you are the person who answered the one that everybody else was asking, which was, why was River Ryan not sent to Oklahoma City? You reported that he was actually sent to Arizona. I imagine at some point this weekend that was the expectation, and then this week we'll be heading to Oklahoma City. Can you give us some insight into why exactly his plan is a lot different than everybody else's?
Well, I think part of it is you have to bake in like why he's starting the season in the minors to begin with. It's because they want him in a controlled environment. I think having him in Arizona to work through some stuff just with their guys. Obviously, he had a really good spring, but there's still stuff that as you're coming back from surgery, you want to nail down. And I think having him in an environment where, especially in a simulated sort of situation, for at least one more outing, they could control, like, all right, you're not going to throw too many pitches in this inning. You aren't going to be subject to all kinds of random stuff. We just can sort of have you go out there and throw and sort of feel good and check another box. So it didn't seem like it was anything other than just like, hey, we want one more look at him just with a controlled set of eyes before sending him off to start the season. They aren't going to necessarily push him workload wise anyways. So why not sort of while you know that you have at least one healthy turn through the major league rotation and the minor league rotation, that you can sort of just keep him on ice for a little bit more with their sort of eyes on him.
Do you think that is going to be foreshadowing for how he even gets used down in Oklahoma City? Like, do you think it's going to be some of these games where if he gets to 25 pitches in an inning, he just gets pulled, or he pitches 3 innings in the game and then maybe does a little bit of work on the side? Like, do you think it's just going to be kid gloves, babying him, limiting the innings and saving those bullets for the big league club at the end of the year?
I'm not sure. I do think there's going to have to be a part where if he's going to help impacting the Dodgers at the big league level, like he's going to have done a
Yeah.
sort of extended inning or extended outing. And there's part of it too that like where Dave Roberts said this spring, like this guy needs to pitch. Like he just needs to log innings. So there's a push and pull there. 'Cause, like this is a guy who doesn't even have 200 professional innings under his belt. Like he was a guy who was kind of babied up through the minors because this was a converted position player who had never been a full-time pitcher before.
Yeah.
So they were building him up 1 inning at a time, 2 innings at a time. I think that start he had in Houston, the start right before he blew out, was the first time he'd ever. It was either he had either pitched into the 5th inning or finished the 5th inning. Either way, like it's that sort of shows how early he was still in his pitching side development, even for his age. Like this is just a guy who hasn't pitched a whole lot, so there's gonna have to be a point over the course of the season where they sort of let him get those reps, but there's also something in the back of your head. It's like, hey, at some point he's probably gonna have to get shut down, or hey, they're gonna maybe you have to taper off his innings at some point if they want to manage him over the course of the season. So I think that's one of those unanswered questions for the Dodgers, and they're kind of leaving open ended, partially because like there might be a situation where enough injuries happen and he's the best option. He sort of just rolls, and they don't see a reason to sort of slow him down. So maybe there's a situation where that happens as well. But I think at least on the front end, they're trying to keep things controlled a little bit.
Speaking of River Ryan, the related story to this is the man who's going to be taking the mound for the Dodgers tomorrow night on Monday night. That would be Roki Sasaki. These are players that are linked because one of them had a very good spring. The other of them did not have a very good spring. And if they were competing in the World Series and needing to win every single game right now, I would imagine these two players would be in opposite places. I think Roki Sasaki would be in Arizona and River Ryan would be in Los Angeles. But Roki Sasaki, all spring, the plan was he's going to be in the rotation. He's going to be in the rotation. Dave wasn't lying. He's in the rotation. He had as brutal of a spring as he could have had, and Dave was telling the truth. So I'm curious for you, given what we've seen in spring training, in the Freeway Series, whether you consider that normal spring training or not, like what are your predictions and expectations for Roki Sasaki tomorrow night?
I'm just looking for how much he can be in the strike zone. I think that's at the end of the day, like especially with the fastball. And if he can command the fastball at all, that then at least you have building blocks to build off of going forward. Because there are things that if the fastball command isn't right, if it sort of looks like it did against the Angels in that start, especially that first inning of that Angel start, then it doesn't matter what level he's pitching at. Like you can't really develop off of that fastball command. So he's never been a guy who like you're gonna expect the fastball to carry everything, but it is sort of the floor raiser of just what you can get out of him. It's still going to be interesting to see what development stuff he has to sort of check off. I think the Dodgers understand that there are going to be a lot of growing pains that come with him at the big league level, understanding how much development there still is to have. And I think there's maybe either it's wishful thinking on their part or they're trying to speak into existence, or it's just a belief that, hey, when things matter and it's not as much in I need to get ready for the season mode and it's more, hey, the season's here, go get outs. They're hoping that maybe that clicks something in for him, whether it be like an intensity of focus or just something clicks right in his delivery where he's able to consistently be in the strike zone. So I think that's the first thing I'm gonna be watching for, because this is a guy who, yeah, like he's had some spurts even in this bad spring where he's like mowed down 6 batters in a row, and he's looked like the version of Roki Sasaki
Yeah.
that you thought he could build off of from last year. But there's also been stretches where I think it's been 4 different times this spring. I think at least once in all 4 of his outings in actual games where he had to get pulled mid-inning for a potential re-entry just because his pitch count got too high.
Yeah, and twice was before he had recorded a single out in those outings. So I'm with you that we're not. Anthony and I have talked on our show. Like I don't care how many hits he gives up. I don't really care all that much about how many runs he gives up. It all comes down to walks, and walks, of course, is entirely linked to can you be in the strike zone? Because as we've joked, you could give up 105-mile-an-hour lasers off the bat every single time, and there's still about a 50-ish% chance that those are going to find a glove and they're going to be an out. When you walk a guy, it's a 100% chance that the player is going to be safe on first base by the time the next guy steps into the batter box. And that's the concern. And so if I pressed a little bit on you and said, okay, we're watching for strikes, we're watching for can he be in the zone? Like, are you expecting him to be in the zone? Are you expecting to be pleasantly surprised by that little box that you're looking at?
I don't really know, honestly. I think that's one of those things where, like, I don't know if the Dodgers really know what they're going to get out of Roki Sasaki.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be hopeful. I think they can be confident behind the scenes. And I think they're trying to give him a lot of confidence with sort of how they're speaking to him and how they're speaking about him and the fact that he's even in the big leagues right now to begin with. But yeah, I think there's a lot of like, you don't really know what it's going to look like tomorrow. Like, you just don't. It's just, he's had stretches where he's looked really good this spring. And I think getting ahead, throwing strikes, it sort of sets everything else up for him just because he might have one of the best put away pitches in all of baseball. He just hasn't been in a lot of situations where he can actually use it. So I think it's one of those things where I'm really curious to see what it looks like tomorrow.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as well that the team that he will be facing is a team he has already seen once this spring. Not to say that like he's seen the entire lineup, but this was one of the teams that unfortunately kind of got to him in the first inning. So he saw Steven Kwan, he saw Jose Ramirez, he saw Manzardo, and so those are all players that reached and hit. Manzardo hit the grand slam before it started. So to me, like I just am looking, and I'm just so curious. And I know this isn't the world that you live in as like a journalist. But for me, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to get 3 full innings out of Roki Sasaki tomorrow. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get less than 4 earned runs tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to get less than 4 walks tomorrow. And I just can't, as a Dodger fan, Fabian, remember being in a position where the Dodgers are not like, oh, this is all we have. So like, I guess like, we'll just keep sending Noah Syndergaard out there or something. It's like they are actively choosing this player to be in this position. And we know the reasons are different, but it's unique as a Dodgers fan to be sitting here like, wait, we have other options, and yet we're going with this option. That's a very un-Dodgers-like thing based on recent history.
Yeah, I think they also knew, like, when they sort of set up the rotation, that they have contingencies in place, for, at least for tomorrow, where you have Justin Robleski lined up for multiple innings behind him, where you're coming off an off day, so your bullpen's close to fully rested. So like they sort of baked this in, knowing that this is going to be in a lot of ways like an experiment on the fly. And yeah, it's weird to have that in a big league environment, but like it's one of those things where you keep asking people like, all right, like, is the big leagues the best place for him to develop? I think there is something to the gap between the big leagues and AAA has never been bigger. And I think there's something where like we've seen Roki Sasaki against minor league hitters where he just goes, all right, fork ball. And if you can command the fastball enough or get it close to the zone, guys aren't going to be able to pick up the difference, and they're going to swing through it and maybe chase fastballs that you normally wouldn't, because big league hitters are just that much better. So I do think there's something to that. But also, like, it's hard. Like, you're in a position where if you're the Dodgers, obviously, like, you want to win games. The Dodgers, everything they do is about winning that night. But also, they kind of understand that they have a luxury of they know they probably aren't going to be fighting super hard to get into the postseason. Obviously, they say that, but they've had it's been harder than expected the last couple of years for them to get in. But yeah, like they know they don't have to necessarily. They're willing to maybe sacrifice a game in April if it means that the best version of Roki Sasaki shows up in September and October.
It is crazy. Just as I look back at sort of the betting lines on this game, I mean, 8.5 is the total in this game. You can get 9+ runs in a game where the Dodgers offense is going to be batting against Parker Messick, and Roki Sasaki is going to be pitching on the other side of things. So it'll be interesting. It'll be fascinating. It'll be must-watch TV there. Let's get to a couple odds and ends before we get to some questions, Fabian. The first one is the Dodgers signed Kirk Cousins' cousin, Jake Cousins. So if the word cousin wasn't in that sentence enough for you, Jake Cousins is a relief pitcher, signed a 1-year deal, basically $1 million. This is like for all the people who have been asking about like JJ Nelson and Jimmy Nelson, and who's the other guy who never pitched? Now I'm blanking on his name. The chat's going to be mad at me.
Danny Duffy.
Danny Duffy. If you're looking for the new Jimmy Nelson and Danny Duffy, folks, let me introduce you to Jake Cousins, a pitcher they gave $1 million to, who had Tommy John surgery in June of last season. Best case scenario, will be back for the second half of this year. He's 31 years old. He's under team control through 2028, arbitration eligible for the first time next year. Does have an option year remaining, which I found interesting in this whole process. When he's pitched, he's good. 90 career innings, an ERA under 3, and a 12.5 strikeouts per 9. What do you make of this? It just feels like we just went from like, this is the most un-Dodgers thing ever, what they're doing with Sasaki. Jake Cousins is the most Dodgers signing of all time, a guy who is already hurt, and that nobody else was like, we'll give $1 million to a guy who won't pitch for us. And the Dodgers are like, where do we sign?
Yeah, it's an extremely Dodgers move. Like, this is what they do. They have dart throws, and you know that they hate trading for relievers at the deadline. Like, Brandon Gomes cited that when I brought up, hey, what's for went into this thinking of signing Cousins? Like, well, I hate to sound like a broken record, but like, yeah, we clearly don't like trading for relievers at the deadline because the cost is so high. So they went and signed a guy who could be ready around the trade deadline. A guy who has been good in the past, has pitched in New York and pitched well in New York in the past, and they said that he's a little bit behind where Evan Phillips is rehab wise from his Tommy John surgery, and Phillips is been throwing a couple bullpens at this point, so like they're on a similar track for around midseason. And yeah, like there's other bonuses there too, like where if he's good, like this is a guy all of a sudden who's got an option. He's got multiple years of club control under his belt, and they aren't paying him a lot this year. And if it doesn't work out well, like all right, they just non-tender him, and that was a $1 million gamble. They already paid Evan Phillips, I think it's $6.5 million, right? To be ready for half a season. Yeah. And that's one of those things where the Dodgers are kind of in a situation where they're going to build up depth wherever they can, just because they know, especially with some of these relievers, they have confidence that they can flip enough of them into interesting pieces into a postseason bullpen, especially when you have Edwin Diaz in the 9th inning.
Yeah. And again, it's worth pointing out that Jake Cousins, as a right-handed pitcher, has been very good when he has actually been healthy. So the reason he's available is not because he stinks. It's simply because nobody else wanted to pay this guy to rehab from Tommy John surgery. Ironic, of course, that it was the New York Yankees that DFA'd him when they could have just kept him around, stuck him on the 60-day IL, paid him the minimum. But yeah, I mean, he in his last season, 2024, it was a 2.37 ERA and a 12.5 strikeouts per 9 rate. So that's pretty elite level stuff from the right side in the bullpen. So nothing there for the Dodgers. A fun one. We did have a super chat, by the way. Sorry, Showtime LA. Is Alex Vesia an extension candidate, Fabian? We were talking earlier about Andy Pages and some of the moves that the Dodgers have offered guys earlier. Do you think Vesia is somebody who falls into that category as somebody the Dodgers could be kind of aggressive in trying to extend prior to free agency? He will be a free agent after this season.
Yeah, I don't know if before free agency, but he's definitely a guy who I could see the Dodgers trying to keep around. He has spoken very highly about like what the Dodgers have done for his career, highlighting like what he does well, like where he was a guy who made the big leagues briefly with the Marlins and like got all the way up from basically Division II baseball to that point without ever actually like finding out like, oh, what is it that makes me effective, despite the fact that he throws anywhere from 90 to 94, 95. And then he shows up his first day with the Dodgers. They say, hey, do you know what your metrics are for like induced vertical break and stuff like that? He's like, what's induced vertical break? And now this is all of a sudden a guy who's like turned this into being one of the best relievers in baseball. So I think he has a lot of appreciation for what the Dodgers have sort of done for him, even before everything that happened, obviously, last fall. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of mutual interest there and sort of staying together long term. But I don't know if a deal necessarily gets done. But before free agency, I wouldn't be surprised. Like the Dodgers have done this before, especially like midseason extensions and even midseason extensions for relievers. I think they've done this with like Blake Trinan
Yeah, I
before.
was gonna
They've
say.
done midseason extensions before, so I don't think opening day is necessarily a hard deadline for them. But it's one of those things where I wouldn't be surprised if Vesia sees the open market just because of how well he's pitched, how much he's pitched. He could be in line for a good payday.
Yeah, absolutely. Some injury updates just bouncing around here real quick. Tommy Edman and Kike Hernandez both took live batting practice on Saturday. On the Edman front, Dave had said late May. Now it seems like there's maybe a little bit of room for that to move up. Kike on the other side, Dave saying he thinks he'll be ready as soon as the 60 days are up. Kike is on the 60-day injured list. Anything you would add to the Edman piece? Like Dave said, Snell and Edman both late May, which felt later than kind of what everything we had been hearing before then. Not surprising because we assumed the Dodgers would slow play it. But do you think early to mid-May is in play for Tommy Edman, or would you still bet on late May?
I think it's one of those things where like as soon as the ankle is 100% and ready to go, like then they'll push it. But I don't think they're necessarily rushing to bring it back. And I think it helps them in a way, at least to like. I'm sure you'd rather have Tommy Edman on the field, but they have some interesting decisions to make once Tommy Edman and Kike Hernandez come back. So maybe it helps to have more of a sample size of an Alex Freeland, of a Santiago Espinal to see what they look like, to have some more time before you have to make those decisions. So I think that might be a factor as well. Just sort of knowing that you don't have to push Edman, you'd rather make sure he's 100%. And yeah, with Kike Hernandez, I think it sounds like things are sort of moving even faster than they originally expected. It's one of those things where they had already put him on the 60-day IL, so it's not like he can come back any sooner. But like Dave Roberts joked, like, yeah, I was watching him take BP on the field yesterday, and if I didn't know any better, he would look like I would say like he looks like he can be in the lineup tonight. So
Crazy.
that's a good sign for like how things are going with his recovery at the very least. So yeah, we'll see what the ultimate timeline winds up being. But for Kike, it's pretty locked in. Where I think it's 22nd of May is the first day he's eligible to come off the IL, 60-day IL. They're certainly targeting that. I think it would not surprise me at all if he's active as soon as possible.
Yeah. Blake Snell threw a bullpen. Dave Roberts said he was impressed by. Evan Phillips threw a bullpen that Dave Roberts said he looked sharp in. Brock Stewart, live batting practice, used the entire pitch mix. Dave estimating that on the Stewart front, one more time against live hitters, probably this week before the Dodgers leave, and then head out on a rehab assignment. Other just random notes, Bobby Miller placed on the 60-day IL alongside Evan Phillips and Kike Hernandez. And then 15-day IL guys, Gavin Stone, Brock Stewart, Blake Snell, Landon Knack, Brusdar Graterol, and then Jake Cousins. Knack, though, you reported intercostal strain. That was another one of those, wait, why is he kind of around the Dodgers, but not in Oklahoma City? He has an injury.
Yes, yeah. Knack has picked up a little intercostal thing, so they're gonna have to wait till that calms down before they can see really where his throwing progression's at. And like Brandon Gomes even said, like intercostal stuff is like really hard to predict timeline wise because it's really you can't do anything at all until it just completely goes away. And we've seen sometimes these things are quick in a couple weeks. Sometimes it's like Max Muncy's thing where all of a sudden you just can't really diagnose it. So they're going to take it slow with him. And yeah, Bobby Miller to 60-day IL was a little bit of a surprise, but it doesn't sound like surgery's on the table right now. It's just in a spot where they aren't able to really ramp up. He was in a spot where he was able to throw off a mound to a standing catcher a couple times in spring training before we left. But it's still, even if you're sort of baking in like, hey, everything goes right, there still is enough of a buildup where it probably would take a month or so, if not more, to sort of get fully ready to go.
The intercostal muscles, by the way, part of your rib cage. I had to Google this. It's
Yeah.
like the oblique. I recently found out where the oblique was, I think during Max Muncy's, one of his injury stints. So the muscles connecting your ribs together. There you go. The intercostal.
Yes, it's a lot of muscles that you do that are involved in doing a lot of things. So it's probably one of those injuries that's a real. I'm not saying any injury is fun to deal with, but it seems like a pain even in your everyday life to sometimes deal with.
We're going to take questions now, but as you say that real quick, like when I think of an NFL guy who's playing with broken ribs and they're like, yeah, it just hurts to breathe. Like it just hurts the movement of your body, like going like this to breathe. I'm like, that sounds bad. Like a sprained ankle, you could sit on a couch and you could forget that you have a sprained ankle for 30 minutes, but something where it hurts to breathe doesn't sound awesome. Okay, let's get to some questions. All caps questions. Eden wants to know the sign you've got behind you. Women belong in sports, I imagine. I was at the Portland Thorns NWSL game last night. Those shirts were everywhere. So I saw the women belong, and I'm like, I saw a bunch of those last night. So there you go.
Absolutely.
TQT asks, Fabian, have the Dodgers shown any concern with the Diaz drop in velocity? Been down 1 to 2 miles an hour all spring, even in the World Baseball Classic.
That's something I haven't asked a lot about, just because like he hasn't been around for a lot of spring. But I think some of it's also like some guys take a while to build up the velocity. It's something that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. But like Tanner Scott's a guy who's like a slow velocity builder too. There's other guys like Alex Vestia. I think his first pitch the other night was like 89. It's like some guys, especially when you're fresh coming out of camp, it just takes a little while to build the last couple mile an hour or two of velocity. And even with a guy like Diaz, like he's a guy who much of his swing and miss comes not just from the velocity, but it comes from how the fastball and the slider play off of each other. And also like the delivery makes it so difficult to pick up which one is coming. And the fact he's able to locate both pitches pretty well for the most part. And when he does, he's unhittable, whether it's at 94, 95 or 96, 97. So it's something that I'm sure I'll definitely keep monitoring. And if it doesn't go tick up, and then it'll definitely be something I keep bringing up. But he's looked effective thus far.
Yeah. Ella Shiva asks, don't you agree that Freeland looked great this weekend? I'm curious from the Dodgers perspective. I imagine there were some people within the Dodgers organization that had big smiles on their faces, not just because of Alex Freeland and helping the Dodgers, but I imagine this was a really complicated decision. They've said it was the hardest decision they had to make, Freeland versus Kim. So I imagine there was a little bit of vindication. Did you get that sense at all that like because of how hard it was to see him go out and succeed was extra special?
I think so. I think there's something to like also like how he got to those results. The fact that like the home run came after like working his way back from an 0-2 count, where he's able to spit on a couple pitches and then really be aggressive to a pitch that was pretty borderline, but also just have the pitch recognition to really jump all over that fastball. But also, I think there's something where it's a credit to Freeland and it's credit to the hitting staff as well, where like they made an adjustment a couple of days right before the season started to his left-handed swing, where I think something with how he sets up is just a little bit different from where it had been late in camp when the results weren't very good. And I think you've seen that along with the pitch recognition continuing to be good, he's now able to really do damage on those pitches in a way that he wasn't able to do so in the spring. So yeah, like, there's some validation for the Dodgers for that decision, but there's also stuff that happens after the decision was already made that helps reinforce how they're feeling. Another change that maybe makes Alex Freeland, even like post decision, a better choice than Hae-Sung Kim, at least to start the season, just with how he's looked post that little adjustment with the swing.
A couple more here. Jay asks, are you surprised at all that Alex Call and Dalton Rushing got no at-bats in this first series?
Not as much with Alex Call, just because like that, like it's just hard to find a lot of spots for him. And I think that's one of those things where they kind of knew that with that fourth outfield spot. Like Kyle Tucker's going to play every day. Teoscar Hernandez is going to play every day. Andy Paz is going to play close to every single day. So there's not really a ton of situations where you see Call getting some playing time. And even like a spare pinch hit about against a lefty, like you still have Miguel Rojas off the bench to sort of use in that spot. So there just hasn't really been a spot that's made sense to use Call yet. Rushing was supposed to start yesterday. And then Will Smith called in the bobblehead trick. He's like, hey, it's my bobblehead. Can I be in the lineup? So they worked it out where where Will Smith was in the lineup yesterday. Dalton Rushing will be in the lineup tomorrow.
Yeah. Back-to-back off days for Will Smith. Good decision there by Dave Roberts. Great decision on that one. Simply Rosie asks, how many innings does Roki Sasaki go tomorrow, Fabian?
You'll have to tell me what percentage of strikes he's throwing first. I think that's a big indicator. I do think that they're gonna try to hope to get as much of him out of him as they can. Like if he's throwing strikes and even if he's getting hit around, I do think that they're willing to like let him sort of work through some stuff. But sort of like they did with Emmet Sheehan for a little while the other night before it obviously spiraled on him a little bit. But Yeah, I also wouldn't be surprised if he just doesn't have it. They're not going to let him get his pitch count up to like 40 pitches the first inning or something like that if he just doesn't have it.
Yeah, it's so hard to tell because you can look at all the spring stuff and they have the caveat of he got pulled from all of these games. And so if we were playing by spring rules, I don't think he would have made it out of the second inning in any of his starts. And so my hope is if his innings pitch can start with a 3, that would tell me that he was able to throw significantly more strikes than what we've seen. Because especially the guys at the top of that Cleveland lineup, when I think about Quan and I think about Ramirez, like those aren't the guys that you want to be a mess against. They're guys that are completely content to take their walks and be selective. And they've already seen it once. And the scouting report is out there. I think he got bailed out a little bit against the Angels in his last freeway start where after the first inning, guys were just swinging at pitches all over the place. And I don't think that the Cleveland Guardians are going to be doing that in a game that counts. So it's going to be, again, must-watch TV for Dodgers fans. And I am so hoping that it's a positive conversation, that when I hop back on here on Tuesday night, that we are not having the same Roki Sasaki conversation of like, is this guy really going to make another start at the big league level? I really hope it's, wow, it seems like he figured something out. I haven't seen any reason to believe it, but it's like the Alex Freeland story you just told, Fabian. Maybe there's something that's clicked. The Dodgers have told us he looks good back here. Maybe they found the click. Maybe the mechanical things have been adjusted. Maybe. Hopefully, all those things have been figured out. So that's going to do it for us here, folks, on Dodger Heads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. That is Fabian Ardaya of The Athletic. Typically, he is going to be on Sunday nights. This upcoming Sunday doesn't work. So this Thursday, Fabian will be back with me on Thursday night. So it'll be me and Fabian on Thursday night, and then Bruce will be back on Sunday. And then from then on, I believe for the rest of in the month of April, it'll be Fabian on Sunday nights, except for this first one. And then, of course, Anthony and I will be here on Tuesday night. So normal Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday schedule from this point forward. Anything you've obviously did the Dodger notes today. Anything else you're working on people can keep an eye out for in the next couple days?
Not myself. I know Katie Woo's working on some stuff just about Edwin Diaz's intro. Like, that's obviously really exciting stuff. It's really exciting new entry to Dodgers team experience. So that'll be interesting to see what sort of comes from that. And obviously, I'll be writing off what we see out of Roki Sasaki and Shohei Ohtani once they get off the mound.
There you go. Well, that's Fabian. You can check out his stuff again at The Athletic. My name is Jeff. Enjoy the rest of your night, everyone. As always, go Dodgers. And yes, still champs.